Have you ever met someone who can eat whatever they want and they never seem to gain weight? You probably know someone else on the opposite end who has to be really careful. It seems like if they eat just a little bit too much, they gain weight so easily. We often say that the one person has fast metabolism and that the other person has slow metabolism, but what does that even mean? Does that even matter? Hey, my name is Lucas. I am a yoga teacher. I'm a nutritional coach. About 20 years ago, when I first got into health and wellness, I lost a whole bunch of weight myself. And I started experimenting with raw food and intermittent fasting and ketogenic diets, all kinds of different experiments to try to understand metabolism. And most importantly, why for some people it's really easy to lose weight. And for other people, it's a lifelong challenge. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not a medical doctor. Please use this for educational purposes only. As usual, I'll drop a PDF link down below with some reference charts and things that might be helpful for you to take when you go into your doctor to have a chat. In this video, we'll talk about the myth of fast versus slow metabolism. Number 2, we'll talk about what metabolic health really is from a 5-point metric standpoint that you can go check with your doctor. And lastly, perhaps most importantly, we'll talk about the number 1 thing you should be focused on if you're interested in weight loss, and it's not necessarily metabolism. Let's talk about this fast versus slow metabolism. Let's imagine we have 2 friends, and their names are Chuck and Barry. They're both 50 years old. They both weigh 175 pounds. They're neighbors, and they live very similar lifestyles, or so we would think. Chuck gets really frustrated because his friend Barry never seems to have to worry about what he eats, and his weight stays exactly the same, whereas Chuck seems like every single day he's struggling just to make healthy choices. The 2 of them go out to dinner, and they're trying to discuss this, and Chuck is really lamenting to Barry about his frustration, and they both order food. And as usual, Chuck, he has to be really careful. If he's not watching out, he'll finish the bread basket, he'll order 2 desserts. Barry seems to order whatever he wants, and here's the thing. Often, without even thinking about it, he leaves half his plate uneaten. Sometimes he orders dessert, sometimes he doesn't, but for sure when he gets home after dinner, he doesn't have cravings, whereas Chuck very often does. Now the 2 of them start wearing health trackers. They both get a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, and Chuck is convinced that he has bad metabolism and Barry has good metabolism. So over dinner that night, they compare watches, and they realize, their resting heart rate is pretty much the same, about 55 beats per minute. They realize that their steps per day are pretty similar. Both of them are doing about 5,000-6,000 steps per day. The one difference that they notice is that Barry sleeps a lot more than Chuck. Chuck gets about 5.5 hours of sleep, not good. Barry's getting about 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep, that's a lot better. But it still doesn't explain things. Chuck is convinced his metabolism is bad, it's slow. And then they look around the restaurant. And in that restaurant, there's another couple of best friends sitting right next to them. And one of them is really big, a clinically obese man. He weighs over 300 pounds. Across the table from him is an anorexic guy. Poor guy, probably weighs 130 pounds, looks like a strong wind could tip him over. And then the 2 of them, Chuck and Barry, they start discussing metabolism. And Barry shares with him that the person in the restaurant with the fastest metabolism is actually the obese man. Why? Well, that person has more body weight, takes more calories to keep that person moving throughout the day. And here's where it gets really tricky, the thing you need to remember. The person with the slowest metabolism in that entire restaurant is the anorexic guy. It's the really thin guy. Why? Because he's underfueled, undernourished, and his body doesn't need much to keep going at all. So now Chuck is really frustrated because if his metabolism is more or less normal, if his metabolism is pretty similar to Barry's, why is it that he's hungry all the time? This is the number 1 question you need to be asking if you'd like to lose weight. Let's put this dinner party on pause for a moment, and let's forget about fast versus slow metabolism. Let's instead think about metabolic health. Metabolic health from a clinical perspective really comes down to 5 factors that your doctor should be checking with you at least once a year, if not twice a year. And those 5 factors, the biggest one, the keystone of course, is your weight, specifically your visceral fat around your abdomen. This is a very important metric for your metabolic health, not speed, but metabolic health. And it can very often lead to these other 4 factors as well. But weight is a big one. The next one would be your blood pressure. The next one would be your blood glucose, your ability to manage blood sugar, your triglyceride levels, and then your lipids, your cholesterol levels. These 5 clinical readings, when you go get a checkup, this is what we should be focused on for your metabolic health. If your metabolic health is off, you're more susceptible to heart disease, to cancer, to neurodegenerative illnesses, type 2 diabetes, pretty much everything bad in your life. So when we think about having a healthy metabolism, it's not about fast or slow. It's really thinking about metabolic health, these 5 factors. Okay, so what about weight loss? What about Chuck and Barry? Why is Chuck hungry? Why is Barry full? Let's come back to our dinner party. Here's the most important question that Chuck asked that most people are not asking, which is, why am I still hungry? Why do I eat dinner, go home, still have cravings? Why do I walk into the grocery store heading for the perimeters and end up in the middle aisles where the cookies, crackers, and biscuits are? And that really comes down to hunger. If you're looking at weight loss, the number one thing you need to ask is, how can I turn off my hunger signals? How can I be less hungry, right? The reason that Chuck and Barry eat differently is Barry gets full. Barry feels satiated. Barry doesn't feel the need to continue. And that's not happening through some sort of willpower or some kind of magical diet. It's happening internally. Okay, so for you, if you're trying to lose weight, that's probably not happening. There are 3 reasons that I'd like you to look at that are not really traditional. Before we get there, I want you to understand that if you have something that is working for you, meaning boot camp style exercise, meaning ketogenic diet, meaning carnivore, meaning vegan, meal timing, if any of those things do turn off your hunger signals, keep doing those. Stop watching this video. But I'm going to assume that that's not working and you're still finding yourself with cravings, still finding yourself making bad decisions. And if that's the case, there are a few things that people often don't think about. And then the first one comes down to satiety. And when they do isocaloric studies, they hire a bunch of college students and they throw them in a room for a week and they feed them bread and butter and meat, meaning they feed them carbohydrates and fat and protein, isocaloric, so just one thing. What you find consistently in these studies is that the people who report the highest level of satisfaction, meaning no hunger, are the people eating protein. Protein fills you up more than anything, but protein is the least common, most expensive macronutrient everywhere in the world. That means when you go into the grocery store, you go into the airplane, the restaurant, wherever it is, you'll find a whole lot of carbohydrates, a decent amount of fat, but very little protein, and it's very expensive. This is the food you want to be eating to increase your satiety so you can make better choices. What does this really mean? Am I talking about an Atkins diet? Am I talking about a high protein diet? No. I'm talking about a moderate protein diet, which really boils down to about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Back to Chuck and Barry, 170 pounds, probably about 170 grams of protein per day is going to help Chuck feel more full. And that's a big, big deal because when you're feeling full, you make better choices. You know this, when you go to the grocery store hungry, you end up in the middle. When you go full, you make better choices along the outside. How would you do this in your life? Try to eat protein with every meal, and you usually want to break up your daily protein into 3 or 4 different meals or snacks. Protein, 1 gram per pound of body weight if you're trying to lose weight. The next thing that people rarely look about is sleep. And again, we come back to Chuck and Barry. When on their trackers, remember, they did notice that their sleep was very different. But why would that matter, right? If Chuck was up earlier, he was probably moving around, probably burning more calories. Maybe, but there's something else that happens when you're underslept. And what happens is your body responds to that with a fight or flight response, with a sympathetic nervous system overly compensating with excess cortisol, and it also squirts glucose into your body. So you might start off the morning feeling wired but tired, nervous energy, but that blood glucose spike, that peak, is often followed by a trough. And where that trough often happens is 10 or 11 a.m. in the morning, mid-afternoon, so 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then usually after dinner, like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, where you get these cravings. And again, the cravings are often for the cookies, crackers, biscuits, highly processed stuff. People don't think about this, but in many cases, that lack of sleep can lead to a glucose imbalance, which unfortunately can lead to hunger cravings. Not really about metabolism directly, but it can be a really important factor in weight loss. The last one, which people don't look at all, is stress. And mental and emotional stress play a very big role, again, in the same peak and valley blood glucose structure. We come back to Chuck and Barry. The big difference that they hadn't looked at is their lifestyles. Chuck's job is 14 hours a day. It's high stress, and he's doing a lot of day trading. So he's on the computer making high risks. There are days when he ends the day nearly broke, days when he's up, but every day is an emotional roller coaster, and his body is constantly on edge. Now, Barry, on the other hand, is semi-retired. He has a couple of rental properties. He basically just spends his day mowing lawns and driving around. He's enjoying the second half of life, whereas Chuck is really, really stressed out. Well, Chuck being stressed out, doesn't all that nervous energy, that fidgeting burn more calories? Maybe, but that's not what we're talking about. Our goal is not to burn dirty. Our goal is not to rev up your body as much as possible. We want to find balance. Chuck doesn't have balance. That nervous stress, energy, overwhelming risk factor, again, leads to these spikes, these peaks, followed by troughs in blood glucose that often lead to cravings. Again, 10, 11 a.m., 3, 4 in the afternoon, right after dinner, those tend to be the times when those cravings come in. It doesn't take much to throw off your system and create more hunger. Hope you found this discussion helpful. When you think about your metabolism, don't think about speeding it up. Don't think about how you can burn more calories in a day. Think about how you can find balance. Make sure that you are measuring these 5 metabolic health biomarkers with your doctor. And when it comes to weight loss, focus on that number one factor is, how can I make myself less hungry? If I make myself less hungry, whatever diet, formula, pattern, exercise, yes or no that I'm following, that's all going to be a lot easier. Remember to grab that PDF down below in the description. If you'd like more science-based yoga videos, hit subscribe down below. If you have experience with boosting up your protein intake or with different timings of sleep or stress management, I would love to hear from you down in the comments below. You can find my teaching calendar at yogabody.com, and I'll see you in the next video.